Hi, I'm Eric Siegel with ericstrains.com. Today we're going to take a look at something a little bit different since it's the holiday season. We're going to check out an O-gauge tinplate set made by MTH. This is the Lionel Corporate Tinplate 269E Distant Control Freight Set. Alright, so as I said, this is something that's different from the stuff I normally review. As most of you know, I typically focus on the more modern, more prototypical looking O-scale stuff, and here we have something that's the complete polar opposite from that. This is a reproduction of a pre-war tinplate train set, the 269E Distant Control train set made by Lionel starting in 1935. Pre-war trains are the type of trains that were made here in America prior to the United States entry into World War II in 1941, and for the most part they looked kind of like this. Now, if you're looking at this from a realism standpoint, you may be thinking, my God, this doesn't look real at all, but you're missing the point. You need to put that aside and realize that back in the day, these were truly toy trains. They were not meant to be realistic. They were meant to be shiny, colorful, beautiful, artistic, and above all, the main ingredient in enjoying these type of trains then and now is your imagination. Now, I could sit here for a couple hours talking about the history of pre-war tinplate trains, and one day I would like to do a video on that, but suffice to say I'm a big fan of these trains, and for that reason I have a growing collection of tinplate style trains, both standard gauge and O-gauge. Most of them are reproductions like you see here, but I've also got some originals as well. I like these trains so much that my wife has told me that if we ever buy a second house, a vacation house, she will let me build a tinplate style layout in that house, so I'm really excited about that. Now, I'm sure there are some guys out there, particularly the younger viewers, who may be saying, you know, I don't get it. I just don't like these type of trains. I don't understand how you can like these when you've got those beautiful high-end prototypical trains. Well, the reason I like these is because they are the complete opposite of those high-end prototypical trains. This is a toy train. It's beautiful. And the enjoyment that I get out of running these is completely different from the enjoyment that I get from running the high-end prototypical stuff. And that's what makes it so fun. It's a lot of fun to explore different aspects and different eras of the hobby. You know, I specialize in the modern O-scale stuff and I love it, but I also love the 1970s MPC Lionel stuff. I love the post-war Lionel and American Flyer trains, and I love these pre-war style trains, and I love them all for different reasons. I get a different type of enjoyment out of each and every one of them, and rather than conflicting with each other, they actually complement each other and increase my enjoyment of the hobby, because I can run the new stuff, and the new stuff makes me appreciate the old stuff, and the old stuff makes me appreciate the new stuff. It works hand in hand and really helps to increase your enjoyment of the hobby. You know, most of the people who buy these pre-war trains, both the reproductions and the originals, are people who are much older than I am. They're people who were alive in the pre-war period, or maybe they had a dad or a relative who was alive back then and gave them the trains. And those older people are not going to be around forever, so it's sort of up to my generation and younger generations to pick up the torch and continue a love for these beautiful pre-war trains. You know, I was born in the 1970s. I was not around in the pre-war period. My dad wasn't around in the pre-war period. So technically speaking, I've got no reason to love these trains, and yet I do. And so if I can do it, anybody can do it. So for you younger guys out there, I would definitely encourage you to explore other aspects of the hobby, including these older trains. You don't have to spend a lot of money. You can go to a train show and get your hands on some beautiful pre-war or post-war pieces for not a lot of money, and you will be surprised by how much you fall in love with them when you actually hold them in your hand and experience them on a personal level. Anyway, that's it for the big speech. I apologize if it was a bit long-winded. As you can tell, I'm very passionate about these types of trains because they are so very cool. And actually, the speech you got was very, very condensed. The original speech was 20 or 30 minutes long. I went into the history of these trains, and it just dragged on forever, so I had to cut it down to get it as short as possible. But like I said, one of these days I would like to do a full-length video where I do talk about the history of these beautiful trains. But what we're going to do now is talk about this set, and then we'll take a look at some of the details and features, and then we'll wrap things up by taking the set for a spin around the layout. So this set was offered in the 2014 MTH Ready to Run catalog, and it was delivered in December of 2014. This is a ready to run set, so it contains everything you need to get started. Therefore, it's a perfect gift for someone who is starting off in the hobby. So you get the engine, the 261E, the hopper, the tank car, and the caboose. You get 12 sections of MTH reel tracks, you get a power supply, and then you get a DCS remote commander. Wait a minute, DCS? I thought this was a pre-war tinplate train. Well, that's the great thing about these modern reproductions. They are totally old school on the outside, but on the inside, it's all modern stuff. So you get the DCS and the ProtoSound 3, and then you get this abbreviated DCS remote to help you get started. You know, one of the great things about MTH starter sets is the great cross-compatibility within the product line. This remote, for example, is not tied to this specific set. You could actually use this remote to run pretty much any MTH starter set as long as it comes with DCS. And in fact, you could run any DCS equipped engine in the MTH product line as long as that engine had an ID of 1. Because all this is an abbreviated DCS remote that is hardwired to run any DCS engine with an ID of 1. And since all DCS equipped engines come from the factory with an ID of 1, that's why this remote can control this engine in this set. But you could control any other DCS engine you wanted to as long as it had an ID of 1 and you ran it on the track with the power supply and remote sensor that comes with this. The other really awesome thing about MTH starter sets is that as long as they're equipped with ProtoSound 2 or ProtoSound 3, they are fully and seamlessly compatible with the full-fledged DCS system. So if you buy an MTH starter set like this, you get the starter DCS remote to get you going. But if at some point in time you want to expand your empire and spend some money and upgrade your systems and buy the big TIU and the full function DCS remote like you see here, you can spend that money and do that upgrade having full confidence that you'll be able to run that starter set with the full-fledged DCS system. And in fact, you will unlock some features in that starter set with the full-fledged remote that are simply not available with the starter remote. And so you'll be able to run all of your DCS trains with one remote and put this starter remote on the shelf. And that's all because the way MTH does things, regardless of whether it's a starter set or a $1,500 Premier Line steam engine, they all have the exact same command system on the inside. That allows for seamless growth within the MTH product line. Now, that stands in sharp contrast to the way that Lionel does their starter sets. Lionel makes some great starter sets, don't get me wrong. They've got some conventional sets, and then a couple years ago they started putting out the Lion Chief and the Lion Chief Plus sets. And they're fantastic, but the only problem is that none of those starter sets are compatible with Lionel's top-of-the-line legacy command system. And so in my opinion, those starter sets do not encourage the user to grow and expand within the hobby. And then if by some miracle that person does purchase the legacy command system, then all of a sudden that starter set is in danger of being useless and obsolete, or at best cumbersome, because even if it's a Lion Chief or a Lion Chief Plus set, you're still stuck using that Lion Chief remote and you can't use the legacy command system to run it. Now, I'm sure Lionel has their reasons for doing it that way. I just personally don't agree with it. I think a starter set should be a gateway into the hobby, and as such, it should allow for a seamless transition to the rest of your product line. Lionel, in my opinion, doesn't do a great job of that. MTH, on the other hand, their starter sets do a fantastic job of that. Alright, now that I've given you a lecture about command control, let's talk about non-command control. If you're a traditionalist and you want to run this set without DCS and without this remote, you can do that. You can run this set with just a transformer and some track. Additionally, one really cool thing that MTH does with their tinplate sets and engines is that oftentimes they will offer a version of a set or an engine without any command control at all. So no DCS, no ProtoSound, just a motor. So if you're looking for a truly authentic pre-war tinplate experience, you can do that too. Alright, so I've shown you a few shots of this train while I've been talking, but now let's go in and take a closer look. We'll start with the engine and then move on to the cars. Okay, here's a look at the front of the 261E engine, and as you can see, it looks fantastic. We've got this nice shiny baked on black enamel. We've got some brass trim, and then we've got an operating headlight in the middle. And then up here we've got these flags. Now the flags, when you take the engine out of the box, they will be packaged separately in a little Ziploc bag, and all you have to do is take them out of the bag and stick them in there like that. Now, just like on the original pre-war steam engines and on many O-scale engines today, the front of the smoke box opens up. There's a screw here and a screw here, and those are hinges, and so the entire front of the boiler here swings down. And originally that was done so that if the incandescent bulb that was inside burnt out, you could replace it. This engine, of course, has an LED bulb, so you're probably not going to have to replace it that often, but it still swings open. Now, to open it up, you pull this piece forward. That's a little latch. And then it swings down like that and opens up. And then to close it back up, you put it back up and close the latch. Now, be advised that if you do that, you will likely scratch the paint like I just did, and now I'm going to have to touch that up with a little black touch-up paint. And that's not a defect with the engine. They all do that, and that's because the original pre-war engines did that. If you open it up, you would likely scratch the paint. And that was because they were toys back then. They were not collector's items, so it really didn't matter if you got a scratch or two on it. Who cared? And so even today with these nice reproductions, if you pull that latch down, you will likely scratch that paint. Now, in the event that you do scratch the paint, as I just did, you can touch it up with a little black paint. I've got some Tamiya black right there, and I've got it on a little brush. And there we go, all better. One of the most distinctive and classic features of pre-war tinplate steam engines are the colorful wheels, and here you can see this engine really delivers in that regard. We've got these beautiful red spoked wheels on the lead truck, the drivers, and the trailing truck. They look fantastic. Realistic? Not at all. Cool? Absolutely. Checking out the side of the engine, you can see we've got lots of nice brass and copper colored plating on the detail parts, and there's a nice 261E nameplate under the cab window. This is probably as good a time as any to tell you that these things are pretty much all metal. The engine, the cars, everything. There's very little plastic. There's a little plastic on the couplers and maybe some plastic washers here and there, but pretty much everything else is metal, just like it was back in the day. The view from the top looks great. Lots of shiny stuff up here. The steam and sand domes are like little mirrors. They're awesome. We've got a little brass bell and some brass bands around this add-on piping here. And then we've got the smokestack, and there is a fan-driven smoke unit down in there. And of course, to load smoke fluid into the smoke unit, you simply pour the smoke fluid directly down the stack. Here's a look at the back of the engine. Starting at the bottom, we've got the so-called wireless drawbar that MTH uses on most of their engines these days. And then we've got a couple of nice grab irons on the back of the cab. The grab irons themselves have a brass finish, and the stanchions have a nickel finish. And then as you can see, the interior of the cab is completely empty, and that is totally normal for these tinplate style engines. Here we have the underside of the engine, and from this angle you can get a better view of these really cool pre-war wheels. You'll see more of those on the freight cars. There are traction tires on the rear set of drivers to give you a little extra pulling power, and then here in the middle there are two pickup rollers. I zoomed in here because this is really one of my favorite sections of these pre-war style engines that MTH is putting out. And it's one of my favorites because they really went to great lengths to replicate the look and feel of a pre-war engine. First of all, they've got the Lionel badge down here, which is great. You know, if they had put a badge that said made for MTH in China, it would totally pull you out and ruin the illusion. And then we've got the rollers. You know, they could have used the more modern rollers like they use on the rest of their engines, but they used the sprung steel rollers just like on the originals. And then finally, we've got this side frame style motor assembly that totally looks like an original motor. Now, up inside the engine, there's actually a modern can motor that drives this thing, but you can't see it because it's way up in there and it's connected to this sort of quasi side frame motor looking assembly, so that unless you're really looking, it totally feels like a pre-war engine. And that is so important when you're making these reproductions, because if you give it away or make it look like it's a reproduction or a modern engine, it totally ruins the illusion. You know, with this great looking assembly here, it really makes you feel like you're back in the pre-war period. And for me, it makes me feel like I understand what it must have been like for a young boy to get one of these sets for Christmas back in the late 1930s. You know, I've said this before, but model trains, toy trains, building a train layout, stuff like that is very much like making a movie, in that the key ingredient is suspension of disbelief, selling the illusion. And that is so true when it comes to these reproductions. It has to look and feel like the real thing, or else the illusion is broken and your efforts are wasted. And that's not only true for the top side, the part of the engine that you see all the time, but also for the underside. Now, most people might not care about what's underneath the engine, but people who are into pre-war trains do care. And so it was very smart of MTH to make this look and feel like the real thing. Because if they didn't, like I said, the illusion would be broken and it would just be a complete waste of time. It's all about selling that illusion, and MTH is great at doing that. All right, that takes care of the engine. Now let's take a quick look at the tender. The tender has a beautiful simplicity to it. It's not very fancy at all, and that's completely appropriate because this would have been a fairly low-end set back in 1935. But even at that, it looks amazing, and one of the reasons for that is because it's all sheet metal with that shiny baked-on enamel, and that alone makes it look so great. So we've got some pre-war trucks down here. We've got a little step that's part of the body. We've got some rivet detailing in the side here, and then we've got a very modest brass Lionel lines nameplate. On the front side, again, very simple, but we've got these beautiful brass grab irons on each side. On the back, we've got the beautiful classic red and blue Lionel logo, and then we've got a box coupler down here, the pre-war style box coupler. Now, this is a proto coupler, so you can actually fire this from the MTH DCS remote. Here we have the top of the tender, and once again, very simple. My favorite part of the tender is these pieces right here that curve over the top. They look really cool. And then back here, we've got another brass grab iron. Here's a look at the underside of the tender. We've got a single pickup roller right here. The speaker for the sound system is here in the middle. There are two control knobs down here. One is for the smoke volume and the other is the master volume control. Okay, so now let's take a look at the three pieces of rolling stock that come with the set, starting with the green 2653 hopper. So just like the engine, the three freight cars have a very simple elegance to them. They're really quite beautiful, and yet at the same time they look very toy-like, because once again, that's what they were, toys. They were meant to be played with. So we've got the pre-war trucks down here, a nice black base, and then we've got this beautiful glossy green body, and then these nice brass detail parts. As you can see, the graphics on the side of the car are flawless, and that is par for the course when it comes to MTH. And from what I've seen, these graphics are pretty much spot on when compared to the original. Now, most of the 2653s that I've seen at York or on eBay are typically black and not green like this. They did make some green ones that I've seen, but they're a lighter green and they have a different look to them. But MTH usually does their homework on these pre-war trains, and so I'm sure at some point in time, Lionel did make a green 2653 like you see here. But it looks great, and you're going to have a hard time finding any major differences between this one and the original. I should probably take a minute and talk about these pre-war style box couplers, because some of you younger folks in the audience who are used to the modern knuckle couplers may not understand what these are all about. But this is what an O-gauge coupler looked like in the pre-war period. Now, of course, it doesn't look very realistic, and you may wonder why they ever used these. But just like on the real railroads, it took the toy companies a while to perfect a reliable knuckle coupler, and it was not until after World War II that Lionel debuted their knuckle coupler, and it was a big deal when they did that. But before World War II, this is what an O-gauge coupler looked like. It's called a box coupler because this plastic box sits up on top of the coupler, and what's cute is that on top of the box there's an imprint of a real knuckle coupler, and so a child's imagination can take it from there and have all sorts of fun with it. The way these worked was that there's a hook here, and that hook latches onto the box of the adjoining car, so when you couple them together, that's what it does. And now they're coupled together, and this works quite well despite the fact that it does not look very realistic. It is very reliable. And then the way you uncouple them is that you can either roll both of these cars over an activation track and remotely uncouple them, or you can grab the two boxes with your fingers, lift up, and separate them like that. And that's all there is to it. So now you know all about these pre-war box-style couplers. And by the way, I apologize for the big band-aid on my finger. I cut the stew out of my thumb a few days ago working on trains. Here's a look at the inside of the hopper. It's pretty basic. One neat thing is that the hatch on the bottom of the hopper does actually open and close. There's a little wheel here on the side of the hopper that you've already seen. And if you turn it down, it opens the hatch. And then if you turn it back up, it closes it. Pretty cool. Here's what the underside of one of these cars looks like. There's a pickup shoe on each truck, and these are used in order to throw the couplers. What you do is you roll the car up onto a control track, you know, the one with the blades on it, and then you can throw the coupler remotely. And the way it works is there's a metal rod here that shoots out and hits this plate, which causes the box to lift up and release the hook. The next car in the set is the 2654 Shell tank car. This is my favorite car in the set for obvious reasons. It's absolutely gorgeous. It's got the same basic specs as the hopper car, but we've got this beautiful yellow tank, all of this awesome brass trim everywhere, and then of course the graphics on the car are absolutely perfect. The last car in the set is the 2657 Lionel Lines Caboose. It's a very basic caboose. There's no interior illumination or detailing, but even at that, it is such a beautiful car because of all the metal and that beautiful baked-on enamel. You really can't beat it. Now, one difference between the reproduction 2657 and the original 2657 is that the original did not have two couplers. Since it's the last car on the train, Lionel saved a little bit of money and only put a coupler on one end. The MTH reproduction has a coupler on both ends. Now that I've shown you the freight cars in this new set, I want to do a little bit of then and now, because when I was at the York Train Show this year up in York, Pennsylvania, I was actually able to pick up the original versions of two of the cars in this set. So right here is an original 2657 Caboose. And like I said, this one only has one coupler, but it looks really good considering its age. And then here is the reproduction. And as you can see, MTH did a fantastic job. Moving on, here is an original version of the 2654 tank car. Again, it looks pretty good considering its age. And then now we'll roll up the reproduction. Looks fantastic. This one looks a little bigger than the original. I'm not sure why that is, but it looks fantastic nonetheless. And the last thing I want to show you is that because these both use the original box-style couplers, if you happen to have some of the old 2600 series O-gauge cars from the pre-war period, they can couple up and run together, and it's no big deal. Alright, the last thing we're going to do before we start this thing up is BFIMO, best feature in my opinion. So my favorite thing about this set, and really all of these MTH tinplate reproductions, is the faithfulness to the originals. You know, whenever you make a reproduction, it can be a complicated venture because oftentimes compromises have to be made, and those compromises can be made for a multitude of reasons. Sometimes the original tooling has been lost and needs to be recreated. Sometimes the original tooling is still around, but it's old and worn out and needs to be redone. Sometimes modern production methods do not allow for some of the older production methods, and other times new technology needs to replace older unreliable technology, or it's cost prohibitive to recreate that older technology. But MTH has done a great job of capturing the look and feel of these pre-war trains. Are they perfect? No, not at all. MTH has made some compromises here and there. There are modern electronics on the inside. They've actually made some improvements here and there over the original trains. But overall, they've done a fantastic job of capturing the mood, the look, and the feel of those pre-war trains, and that deserves recognition. All right, let's go ahead and start her up.
We've got a schedule to keep. Let's get her steam. Grab a shovel and spread out that coal. That'll do it. Check on that water level, will you? Swing that spout over. Okay, that's enough. Dope up those side rods, will you? Looks good.
The sound set on this engine is pretty typical MTH, so if you own any other MTH steam engines, the sound set should be pretty familiar. So let's check out the whistle. And here's the bell. Normally I would do the crew talk sounds right about now, but I'm going to save that until I do the passenger freight announcement sequence once the engine is in motion. So let's go ahead and move it out.
It's a good thing we don't have a long string of cars to worry about clearing the main.
I synchronized my watch with the conductors back at the yard. What time do you have?
I have 15 after the hour exactly.
All right, let's get trackside and get a look over as it passes.
There she is now, right on the schedule.
So, did you see anything abnormal?
I didn't see any smoke, but I heard that flat spot about 4 cars behind the tender.
I'll call the tower on the trackside phone and let them know that we're ready to go.
Good idea.
We're clear. The conductor just gave us the highball.
I want to blow her down now. Clear? Clear.
All right, that about wraps it up for this review. This is an absolutely gorgeous set, and because it is a ready-to-run set that contains everything you need to get started, it's a great way to introduce someone to the hobby, and more specifically to the world of pre-war tinplate style trains. So for you younger viewers out there, now that you've seen this review, I hope that inspires you to go out and try some of these pre-war pieces, either originals or these modern reproductions. I promise that if you give them a try, you will fall in love with them. They have a beauty that's all their own, and the enjoyment that you get from these types of trains is completely different from the enjoyment that you get from the modern high-end O-scale trains that I normally focus on. They each have their charm, and so I encourage you to give it a try. If you're interested in purchasing one of these, the retail price is right at $500. Although if you go through a good MTH dealer, you will probably be able to get a decent discount off that retail price. And as always, if you're looking for a good MTH dealer, try my favorite train store, which is Legacy Station. You can find them on the web at www.legacystation.com or give them a call at 770-339-7780. Anyway, that's it for now. I'm Eric Siegel. Happy holidays, and I'll see you next time. To discuss this model or any other O-Gauge trains and to meet other O-Gauge modelers, check out the O-Gauge Railroading Magazine online forum at ogrforum.ogaugerr.com.